Hey folks, today is a day of true confessions. Last year the pandemic hit, we had to really change how we did things around this farm, and some of the things, I gotta tell you, we didn't do very well. We're gonna walk you through one of them. Well, last year the pandemic hit. I know we're not supposed to talk about pandemic, but it kind of knocked us for a loop. Can't really talk about what other people did or didn't do. That's not really the issue here. The issue is how did it affect us? It kind of hit us really hard psychologically. We didn't realize it at the time, but when you get your business kind of whacked and you have to really scale back, you kind of just tend to not put a lot of effort into areas that you normally would. And one of the things that we didn't do is one of our field areas that we would have been using last year for all our summer annuals and things of that nature, we stopped working on it in March and just said it wasn't a point to it. And what we did is we focused in on things that came out of our tunnels, and that is what we basically sold, with the exception of a few things like we did some marigolds and some zinnias and some boxes up above. Um, but basically, most of our annual production that was field, we just stopped. And so this area went to fallow. I mean, literally, we didn't mow it, and it looks like hell. But believe it or not, underneath all this kind of dead stuff and green growing grass and things of that nature, besides a whole field full of voles, there's still irrigation basically still to this area, and there's still great potential in terms of the soil that was actually into the beds is actually in really pretty good shape. So what we're going to do is this year is we're changing. We're still kind of in the same problems. We until vaccines and all this kind of stuff get all straightened out, when normal returns for us, we're not really sure. So we're going to go with a plan that things are going to be what they are until they change. And we don't need this much space to do flowers, but we do need more space to do vegetables because we're trying to do more food and we're trying to integrate more than what, as an example, we need areas where we can grow more things like dried beans, or more things like well, potatoes could even be, or sweet potatoes, or things of that nature. So things that require more space.
More tomatoes.
More tomatoes. Well, we're going to do some tomatoes in the hoop house, but even some field tomatoes might be a good idea too.
We had a lot of tomatoes last year and it wasn't enough.
You're right. So probably like indeterminate type tomatoes, things of that nature. So this is all really a pretty good space to do that in combination with some flowers, just kind of hedge our bets. So we're going to do a bit of both, but we don't need the whole thing. This area has probably 12 beds ultimately that are about 100 foot long and about 4 foot wide roughly. And they're all drip irrigated, or they have access to drip irrigation. So what we're going to do though is we think that probably even when things come back, that our situation probably is going to not be as robust as it was, and so we probably won't need as much field space for flowers as we used to have. So part of the area, when you look at up above, and we'll kind of like rotate the camera a little bit here to take a picture of it. And what you see some black hoops, poly hoops up there. And those beds and that point forward where there's like a plastic sheet where the poly tubes are forward is all going to be taken out and returned to just pasture grass, which will be mowed. So we'll take the irrigation out of there, we'll take all the hoops out of there, and that will just go back to being mowed. Above that, we have some perennial beds for things like hellebores, sage, and lady's mantle, things like that.
Perennials.
Yeah, soft perennials are up there. So what we're going to do today is we have some plastic tarps that I've hauled off the peony beds, and we're going to start with the first group here. These are 100-foot beds, and we're actually going to tarp not just the beds, but we're going to tarp the pathways too. And the whole point is we have a really bad infestation of couch or quack grass, rhizomial grasses in here. And what I want to do is, I know it won't kill it, but what I do know is that it'll at least knock back all the other vegetation so I can see it better, for starters. And then we can kind of like do a bit of regrading, and probably we're going to do mulched. What we're going to try to do is get to the point where we're mulching the pathways with like wood chips or bark dust or something cheap, if we can find something cheap. Free is kind of what we like to get to. But the whole point is this area will be much more controlled and much smaller. Then we have a couple of beds over here that one of them is 75 foot and the other is, I think it's about 50, maybe 60 foot. And those will be for later summer flowers. And there's one short stub bed on the end of that we'll take out and return that to grass too.
It's just always wet.
Right. And
It's
then
like a bog.
Then we have a field side on the other side over, you can see it's kind of like it was into the same situation last year. Those will be returned to flowers for the summer. Zinnias, things like that, we'll put over there. And that area will be cleaned out. Basically, we got our eucalyptus, rosemary, and those things are all slated to be, they need to be pruned and coppiced and all that kind of stuff. So we got a lot of work to do here. Today's, I don't know, 23rd or 24th of February. And so the first thing to do though is get these guys tarped for about 6 weeks. So that's what we're gonna do here. We're using, this is originally was a tarp we bought, oh gosh, probably 4 years ago now, or pretty close to 4 years ago, from Farmer's Friend LLC. And it's just a silage tarp. And it's, I think it's 5 mil, pretty UV resistant. Although, one of the things around here is we do have deer, we do have rodents, and there's just over time, no matter, when you're using this stuff, holes get punched in it. So we've got some holes that are always a problem that we have to patch up until these things, you can't use them anymore. So we got one that's 16 foot wide and 100 foot long, and then we got two 50 footers that are 16 foot. And so we're gonna tarp, I think we're gonna be able to do like 4 beds in here, or at least, well, yeah, probably 4 beds, no, 3 beds, excuse me, and 2 pathways. That's kind of what we're gonna get to. I've walked the beds and removed all things that might be sharp and poked through. So really at this point, the only thing to do is to kind of put this tarping down. And the reason why we're going through this long explanation of this stuff is because we're going to be doing a lot more videos about this and reclaiming this. And this is kind of like, there's always a lot of questions people have on no-till. It's like, well, how do you take something that's basically now pasture and get it into the point where it's workable and usable without using power equipment? And that's kind of like, this is the first step. So this isn't going to be a super long and involved video, and it's not complicated. It's putting plastic out and throwing on a pile of sandbags onto them, and just to hold them down. And then we give it a good 4 to 6 weeks at this level with this much vegetation on top to get rid of most of what's here. And we're not going to disturb the irrigation or anything underneath it. And mostly that stuff should be pretty visible by the time we pull these tarps off, which I guess if we're looking at this, is it's going to be sometime early mid-April, which would be just about right for starting to plant in some.
We should
annuals.
have like our field snapdragons, and our last group of stock should be going into the field at that point.
Yeah, that'd be about right. All right.
So.
Okay, so let's start with. We're going to start with. I think I'll try to do this 100-foot guy here. I got to move my 50 over to that side, because what we're going to do is we're going to have 100 at 16 and then 2 50s kind of like right next to each other. So this guy here is kind of in the wrong place. So I'm going to move this guy. Okay, I'm going to move this one over here. I should always talk to the camera.
Yeah, we don't want to see.
Don't turn your back on the
Don't turn
camera.
the back.
No professionals. So
Kidding.
we're going to move this guy over up above, and then we're going to start out with the 100-footer here. I'm going to put the black side up because what I want to do is I want to absorb heat. But the neat thing about this type of tarp too is if you're using it in the summertime and you want to cut down the amount of heat absorption to it, this will be a little bit more reflective going to the white side. So you kind of get a choice. Okay, I'm going to get at it here. I'm backing away. Okay, we got it laid out here. We covered 3 rows plus their pathways, and so it's about 20 feet wide by 100 feet long. And we have some holes because this is an old tarp, so I'm going to have to come back through with some Gorilla Tape or something like that and try to patch up a few of them, particularly in the uphill side. I've got some problems up there. But basically, you can see it's kind of poofy. This is where there's some extra grass. It was a type of clump grass that really kind of is it just gets really dense, kind of a clump to it, and it will die underneath this plastic. I could already feel the heat too, like when I was, like it would poof up a little bit before I got the edges singed down. So the sunshine we're having right now is building up heat underneath here. There's tons of moisture in this soil. Matter of fact, that's the number one reason why we stopped tilling this area, is because it stays so wet for so long that if you try to get a tiller in here, you'll just end up creating clay chunks. So this whole thing is it's almost like we're starting from scratch in a sense, other than the irrigation is already in. And so we're going to give this minimum 6 weeks. It might go as long as 8. We'll check in on it a few times, probably like on 3-week intervals, and see how it's coming, see if the green stuff is dying or dead, and seeing how the roots of the other stuff are breaking down. What I anticipate when we're done with this is that when we pull the plastic off, all the top green stuff will be dead. Anything that was a perennial rhizomatous grass probably will just be knocked back. So it won't have anything green on top, but the roots will probably still be alive. Everything else that was brown already, probably some of it will be gone, but definitely anything that had roots will be rotted out. So we'll just basically rake that excess refuse off and put it in our compost pile. So what we should be able to get down to, particularly on the beds, is we should be able to get back down to the irrigation and back down to almost a bare soil after we do the raking. That's what we're aiming for. Then that kind of gives us a clean slate to start over. And so then we'll get this one done. We'll be working on the others over the next week or two to clean those up and get the old irrigation out of that area that we're gonna just basically return back to grass. And then this area plus the rows that are above it. After this is done, we'll be tarping the rows above it. So we're going to rotate up the hill another 3 rows and do the same thing. I'm going to put tarps on these guys behind me shortly. So we should have in here probably, I'm thinking each one of these rows is about 300-400 square feet. So we should have at least 2,000 square feet of plantable space in here, which for us is going to be pretty good. Okay, so let's do a quick Q&A on this thing. Why do this versus, say, tilling an area? Why, or is it okay to till an area first if you're setting up something that's like a raw pasture grass with sod and stuff in it? And the answer is, it really depends on the context of your situation. How fast do you want to bring something into production? How wet is your soil? In many cases, you know, it's a very successful thing to do, to come in and say, you know what, I've done a soil test on the area. I know I need to add some amendments to it, maybe, and you know, lime it or something of that nature. And it's perfectly acceptable to come in and mow it down as tight down to the ground as you can, and apply your minerals, and then till it in to bust up the sod. As long as you know that first pass of tillage is your last, and from that point forward, you're working with more of a permanent set of beds. Now, we're not tilling in here because we already talked about it. We got irrigation in here. It was, you know, the beds are previously worked. So once the vegetation that's killed off the top, the underneath soil is okay. But let's just say, for argument's sake, you don't have a tillage equipment or access to it, but you do have time. This is a perfect way to do it. You don't even have to go buy a Farmer's Friend silage tarp. If you just go to your Home Depot and you get a 6 mil, or Lowe's, a 6 mil black plastic construction grade, you'll get, typically there's enough UV inhibitors in that you'll get a good season out of it, and you can use that is in the same methodology as this. And that is a perfectly good way to go. And with the more, you know, if you've got really a lot of perennial weeds in it, like a thistle or a couch grass that you can't even deal with it, quackgrass, couch grass, any kind of perennial type weed, bindweed, those sort of things. It's a good way to start, particularly if you know, maybe we'll pull it off and then rotate in a cover crop and then come back and tarp it again and just kind of keep it going in a couple of cycles like that. That'll work too.
What about the sandbags?
These sandbags we purchased from, it's a company run by American military veterans called the Sandbag Store. And I figured, you know, hey, somebody who is in the Army probably knows about filling sandbags and knows what a decent sandbag looks like and should be made of. And these things have been great. But these bags are now on their 4th year, and there's no UV degradation to them at all. So
They were a little on the spendy side.
they're more expensive. They're probably 2 to 3 times more than the cheap bags. I made the mistake one year and I bought cheap bags. They lasted 6 months and then they just disintegrated. Like the bottom was still okay because that part wasn't exposed to the sun, but the top just rotted out. So like when I went to go pick it up, I just go boom.
So
And
that's an expense you recommend.
Right, I do. It's definitely worth it. If you're, you know, really going to be doing a lot of tarping and it's just a really integral part of your system, in the longer term, when it's affordable to do so, get a more UV resistant plastic. But there is one thing about this. You know, you can spend a lot of money on a special plastic that'll never degrade. But the biggest problem with it when you lay something out like this in nature is nature. Okay? If you got deer, they're going to walk on it. When they walk on it, their hooves are going to make indentations or even rips. So you got to be prepared for the fact that this thing is going to have holes in it. Short term, you may have rodents, particularly in the fall if you're doing like an occultation type thing. Rodents get under it and they're lazy. They don't want to go find out the edge where they snuck in, so they'll chew a hole through the top. So you can end up with, you know, some good sized holes in the plastic. So the downside of this stuff is this is the 4th year on this tarp, and frankly, it's probably going to be its last. Some parts of it I'll probably cut up and be able to use in smaller areas. But I've got so many holes now that have been put in by rodents and deer and animals that are, I've had foxes cut holes in it looking for voles. They can smell them underneath, so they just do their thing. So I mean, it's all kinds of things. So you got to kind of weigh it. Don't don't sweat it if you buy a Home Depot type plastic and you get one season out of it. Going and buying a $400 silage tarp, or I guess you got to weigh it. That's the point I'm trying to make, is you got to weigh it in your conditions and where you are and what you deal with.
We kind of like having the fact that we can use it from season to season, though.
Yeah.
It's kind of recycling.
Well, I don't want to get into this mode where it's like, one and done.
Yeah.
But one aspect of it is cost. And
Yeah.
if you're just starting out and you're saying, I could buy a $70 roll of this stuff that's 10 foot wide, 100 foot long at Home Depot, and it'll last me a season, maybe I'll get 2 out of it. I've had some of that plastic last me 2 seasons. Versus, going and buying a $300 silage tarp.
Gotta work it out on what you can afford. In terms of doing this to get the fields ready, this is not like a week or so. This takes time. You have to plan this.
You have to plan it. Like right now it's February, and we're not planning to plant this area. The moisture level will be down such, and the temperatures will be right, that we're talking about planting in this area in late April or early May. Actually, most of the stuff that's going to go in here is going to be frost sensitive, so we kind of target for that for first week or so of May to get stuff in. So that gives us a good 8 weeks to deal with this.
So if you need to get into your field sooner, this is not the way to go.
Yeah, you gotta weigh that into your considerations. If you say, oh, I've got stuff I want to plant in here, you got to kind of take it as like, okay, well, how much biomass do I have in here? If it's not much, 3 or 4 weeks could be good, and it might work.
But we have massive.
This was like
heavy
pasture. Okay, and so there's
it's
a lot
like
of
starting
stuff
over.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff for the microbes to work on. So that's why we're going as long as we are. But also too, think about it. Time of the year also plays a big role. Once it starts warming up, the microbes really start working a lot faster. So things will progress faster. When you're talking about March and April versus January and February. So you got to kind of take that into account too. So anything else? What do you think?
I think we covered.
Okay.
And we covered.
So let's check back in a few weeks and see how it goes. And I want to thank you guys today for joining us. And as always, stay safe out there and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.